Are Canadians being misled? CBC's election coverage raises alarms about truth and accountability. Prime Minister Mark Carney's new government has stumbled right out of the gate, and the reactions are harsh. Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangari, barely 3 weeks into office, was grilled in the House of Commons and looked unprepared, even admitting he hadn't reviewed the firearms licensing files. On video, he stuttered through basic firearms safety course questions, drawing ridicule and raising real concerns over competence at the highest level. Conservatives pounced, accusing the Liberals of appointing ill-prepared leaders with no answers for rising violent crime and gun violence. Not long after, Immigration Minister Lena Metlidge-Diab found herself under intense pressure. Conservatives weaponized official numbers. During a housing crunch, Canada issued 500,000 study permits, something Diab fumbled and claimed was inaccurate, until the data was pulled straight from government databases. With over 817,000 newcomers in just the first 4 months of 2025, driven by student visas, work permits, and refugee claims, the public's frustration is building. Provincial housing grids are bursting, and healthcare and labor systems groan under the strain. It's no surprise Conservatives say the government is trading wild statistics for narratives. Which brings us to Carney's own legislative response. Days ago, the government introduced the Strong Borders Act, a sweeping new bill granting the Canada Border Services Agency and RCMP far-reaching new powers, from mail inspection to cancelling or suspending immigration status. It also allows barring asylum seekers who've lingered beyond a year. The Liberals say it's about safety, but rights advocates warn it tramples due process, mirrors U.S.-style crackdowns, and could unleash mass deportations, threatening Canada's reputation on refugee protection. From the street, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne has been selling a $500 billion budget with all the energy of a reality show trailer, but zero substance. Promises of a blockbuster plan without specifics resonate like cheap political spin. In Parliament, he spun a narrative of ditching consumer carbon pricing and putting the onus on industry. Critics say this is economic sleight of hand, distracting from climate commitments and avoiding real accountability. Canceling a small carbon tax that never significantly curbed emissions hardly moves the dial when the big polluters are still being left off the hook. Meanwhile, April brought bad news on the economic front. Canada ran a record $7.1 billion trade deficit. Export values plunged. Auto manufacturing took a heavy hit, and shipments to the U.S. dropped sharply under renewed tariff pressure. Carney's response? A standard media-ready soundbite. Diversify trade partners. But analysts point out that while exports to other countries nudged upward, it's simply not enough to offset the collapse with our largest customer. Steel, automotive, and energy sectors are all under siege, and the government's response feels like an empty slogan. Against that backdrop, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has seized momentum. Poilievre has zeroed in on Carney's stumbles, branding them as evidence of a government too soft, too reliant on spin. He's amplified the flashpoints: guns, immigration, inflation, deficits, and is calling for transparency with real data, not rhetoric. Poilievre knows numbers, and he's using them to pressure the Liberals into delivering honest answers, or risk losing public trust entirely. Even CBC's coverage hasn't escaped scrutiny. Critics argue that national broadcasting is downplaying ministerial errors and giving headline coverage to fluffy promises like Champagne's budget blitz. Opposition MPs accuse CBC's election framing of leaning more toward puff pieces than scrutiny, with question marks rarely pursued after initial stumbles. If the media doesn't press Carney's team harder, they say, Canadians won't get the full picture, just polished talking points echoing through FM waves. Let's circle back to Alberta, which offers a live case study in political contrast. UCP polling shows a massive majority on the horizon, dominating nearly all 34 seats, and NDP support trailing in the single digits. Provincially, Premier Danielle Smith's team remains steady, riding resentment toward federal policies perceived as elitist. Western alienation may seem abstract, but in Alberta it's tangible. The disconnect isn't just electoral, it's existential. Many Albertans feel disciplined by Ottawa, with unelected technocrats pulling strings in full view. Amid this, Carney's Liberals have floated a federal housing strategy: Build Canada homes, doubled home construction rates, and tax cuts on GST for affordable units up to $1 million. The outline includes putting $114 million toward Brampton housing and phasing out GST on new homes. Yet, the critique is consistent: half measures meant to be photogenic, but lacking clear investment scale or timelines. Meanwhile, rental markets are still spiking and homelessness isn't shrinking. A key thread tying all this together is accountability, both for government and for media. Are ministers being held to standard? Are raw facts being shared? Conservatives argue that Carney's team is managing headlines, not policy. CBC is accused of enabling that messaging, trading bold questions for cuddly coverage. If Canadians believe they deserve tough questioning and sensible data, the worry is they're only getting the gloss. Mark Carney himself, and his carefully curated image as global policymaker, faces a tough test. A former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor, his technical credentials are solid. But technocrats in political roles often stumble when pressed at the podium. Carney needs to show he can lead ministers who understand their files and communicate with precision, or risk looking out of touch. The confidence once sparked by economic charts now needs concrete policy results. The final question is whether Canadians are being misled, drawn into narratives of progress and composure, while deeper cracks form below. With fierce backlash over immigration policy, a trade slump, soft election coverage, and ministers caught off guard, those cracks are getting harder to ignore. If CBC's spotlight stays shallow and governance stays glossy, the public's trust could erode fast. As the campaign intensifies, the Liberals and CBC face a midterm reckoning. Can they offer real answers for guns, migration, inflation, and trade? Or will Canada slip further into feel-good messaging that leaves real problems unresolved? Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are pushing hard, demanding clarity where there's gloss. For Carney, the test isn't poll numbers, it's whether he answers with substance or spin. In the end, Canadians deserve more than polished soundbites. They deserve truth, accountability, exact figures, concrete plans. And they deserve media that shines a light into political corners instead of sweeping imperfections under the carpet. That is the true battleground of this election, and it's one that CBC, Carney, and all Canadians will have to confront head-on in the weeks ahead.